Hello, everyone. It's Gordon Causey again. We are in the late hours of March 9th, Sunday, March 9th, 2025, 11:31 p.m. A minute late from when I said I was going to start this, or I had scheduled this to start at 11:30 p.m. Eastern time, daylight savings time. And Candy is on my last stream that I just did with a friend of mine, a kid well, he's not a kid anymore, he's my age, but we were friends as children back in the early 70s, grade 2, 3, 4, David Pickler. Uh, Interesting guy to talk to. It was neat catching up with someone who I knew from so many years ago. And this was the second time we have spoken in our adult years. The first was early back in the COVID era. Candy, of course, regulars know she gets a treat at the start of my videos. I didn't give one to her during the live stream I just completed with Dave. But okay, sit down. Sit down. Oh, sit down. Lay down. Speak. Okay, close enough. And Candy has her treat and I'll get some peace. Although, if I don't give her a treat, she's okay with that. She goes and she lays down on the couch or whatever. But anyway, thanks for watching again. I guess I'm risking overexposure if that doesn't sound too risque. This will be my third video today. And I just feel it incumbent to offer up my thoughts on what just something significant happened today. The Liberal Party of Canada has chosen its next leader, Mark Carney. He won in a landslide. He got something like 86, in and around 86% of the points needed to win the leadership. The way the Liberal Party worked, it's a bit of a complicated process. It's not just vote casting. Every riding in Canada, of which there are currently 338 in the upcoming election, I think it's expanding to 343. But each riding was given 100 points. And then Liberal Party members would vote, and the votes would be counted based on riding. And then each riding would have 100 points assigned to it. And the more votes she got, the higher the percentage of votes she got in a specific riding, the greater the number of points you got. And so I have the results up here. Mark Carney got 29,456.91 of the available points. And that was like 85, 86%. Christia Freeland, number two, she only got 2,700 odd. And Karina Gould, she got 1,100. And Frank Bayless, he likewise got just over 1,000. And basically, there were a total of 151,000 ballots that were cast. There were actually 163,000 people eligible to vote out of roughly 400,000 Liberal Party members. Liberal Party members, 400,000 members who are eligible to vote. They then had to go, those 400,000 members had to successfully navigate a 3 or 4 step verification process. And at the end of it, 163,000 were deemed eligible to vote in the leadership race. And of those 163,836 who were eligible to vote, 151,899 actually did vote. And I know there's been some commentary on my station and elsewhere talking about the fact that Liberal Party members were complaining, dozens, reportedly by CBC, dozens were complaining that they were unable to navigate this verification process and that they were shut out from being able to vote in the leadership race. For what it's worth, there's not any scrutiny of this by an outside body like Elections Canada. This leadership race was run internally by the Liberal Party of Canada. So they set the rules, they govern it, they do the oversight. It's their game. I have Gordana Silvana. she's putting on, she's writing, yes, I'm aware of that. I watch Mr. Baby from British Columbia every day. That's what they said. Over 40 million people in Canada, only 133,000 vote for Mark Carney. And Mark Carney does become the next Prime Minister of Canada. And in the thumbnail to this, on what happens next, I know there's some confusion by Canadians. Our Westminster system of parliamentary democracy isn't always very well understood. Americans looking in don't know even less about our system. In the United States, you vote directly for the president of the country. In Canada, we do not directly elect the Prime Minister of Canada. What happens in Canada is after a general election, when 338 and soon to be 343 ridings, it's like 338 little tiny elections. And in each riding, you're deciding, are you sending a Liberal Party of Canada member or a Conservative or an NDP or a Green? Who are you sending to Ottawa? And then once it's all settled out, how many seats the Liberals have, how many seats do the Conservatives, NDP, Bloc Québécois, the Greens, how many seats do each party have? Whichever party has the most seats, whatever party has the most seats, they form the government, and whoever their leader is the leader, becomes the Prime Minister of Canada. So after the Liberals won the last three elections, because Justin Trudeau is the leader of the Liberal Party, he is automatically the Prime Minister of Canada. When he stated on January 6th his intention to resign after a robust leadership race, et cetera, then he said once that process is complete, then he will fully resign. And then a new leader will take over, and that new leader automatically becomes Prime Minister of Canada. And Mark Carney doesn't currently have a seat in our House of Commons, but he can still lead the party, still serve as Prime Minister of Canada. He just, if he wants to participate, he can't participate in things like question period actively, but he can sit in the gallery and watch it taking place. This has happened before. It's not common, it's rare. I was reading where it's happened 5 times in Canadian history. I knew of one such instance happened during my lifetime with John Turner. He was the leader of the Liberal Party, but was not yet a sitting member. This is similar to the manner in which Mark Carney has become leader of the party. I have had people commenting on my streams and saying, Liberals are voting for the next leader, not the Prime Minister. No, they are also voting for the next Prime Minister. That's what they just did. By choosing Mark Carney as the leader of the Liberal Party, he is right now, as I speak at this moment, Mark Carney is the Prime Minister designate. It's like when Donald J. Trump was elected president of the United States in the US, they referred to Donald J. Trump as the president-elect. Now we have a Prime Minister designate. And once Trudeau assuming he fulfills his commitment, his intention to resign the leadership of the Liberal Party, at that point, Trudeau and Mark Carney will go to Rideau Hall, and Mark Carney will be sworn in as Canada's next Prime Minister. I don't know what number it is. And I have Jeffrey Whitty asking, can he be honest on my channel? Absolutely, always. And he was, how do I say this? My family came here long ago, but over my own life, I have seen this nation corrupt more and more to the point it is self-loathing. I get that. Canadians, certainly white Canadian males, there's this narrative that's going out, especially in our educational systems, and particularly at the post-secondary level in our universities, where white males, white straight males, you are the cause of all the world's ills, and you get none of the credit for all the amazing, things that exist in this world. Yeah, everything in this world isn't perfect, but there's good stuff and bad stuff. And white men get all the blame and none of the credit. And this is being indoctrinated. This is pervasive in our media. It's pervasive in our educational systems, and it is wrong. So, Jeffrey Whitty, I'm with you 100% in your commentary. And I don't think, it's this idea of identity politics that is taken over. It's taken over. You're not an individual anymore. You're a member of a group. And just to repeat a line that I often, this has become something of a theme with me, being the poster child for cancel culture. This identity politics says, well, white men have been overrepresented currently and historically, and so they have to sit down and shut up, and they're not allowed to put their ideas out. They're not to be part of any discussion. In order to be part of the discussion, we need homosexual Aboriginal females at the table because we don't have any of those. And I'm an advocate for saying, let's look at the quality of the idea, of the opinion, of the point of view, and then weigh that and divorce it from what camp, what tribe, what identity. And this is the whole idea behind identity politics, is to categorize human beings. And it's inherently discriminatory. What should matter in the marketplace of ideas is the ideas themselves, not from whence they originate. It's just my own personal view. Let me get on. Jeffrey's filling up the live chat, and everyone else who's watching right now, you're welcome to do likewise. And Jeffrey is saying, with respect to Mark Carney, I'm sure that he can't stand on the floor, though, or speak, LOL. No, he cannot until he gains a seat in Parliament. Once he has a seat in Parliament, he can then take the Prime Minister's chair as leader of the Liberal Party and as the sitting Prime Minister, and then he can be grilled, his feet can be held to the fire. But I'm here to tell you, that's not going to happen. I'm going to give my opinion, and it's a broadly shared opinion, about how things are going to play out over the next few days and weeks. Let me go on. He's saying, but he could rule by decree. Right now, we're in a situation where the Parliament of Canada, our House of Commons, it has been suspended. The parliamentary term is prorogation. Parliament is prorogued. But so there is nothing. The only way they can enact legislation at this point that has the weight of the rule of law is they have to do something that in Canada is referred to as orders in council. In the United States, they refer to it as an executive order or an executive action. And that's the only way that any legislation could be put forward. Anything with the force of the rule of law behind it, it would have to be an order in council, because normally what will happen is the government will propose legislation. It will go through first reading, second reading in the House of Commons. Eventually it comes up for a vote. Might have to go to committee hearings as well, parliamentary committee hearings. But there's debate. There are committee hearings. There's a first vote, a second vote. If it is approved on the second vote, then it is kicked over to the Senate, and the process repeats. They can go through Senate hearing. Legislation can go through Senate hearings. It's debated on the floor in our what is referred to as the red chamber, sometimes also called the chamber of sober second thought. And then they can either vote in favor of it or reject it, or likewise, they can kick it back to Parliament with recommended changes. It's a lengthy process. But none of that is going on right now because Parliament is suspended. And Jeffrey is bringing up the idea of emergency powers. We saw that during the trucker convoy when I think I forget what it's called now. It used to be called the Emergency Measures Act. It used to be called the War Measures Act, and then the name was changed and the legislation updated, but basically the same idea. In a fashion, it's martial law. That's what allowed the Canadian government to tell banking institutions to freeze the bank accounts of hardworking Canadians who merely for a political statement. There were Canadians during that trucker convoy protest in Ottawa in February of 2022 who supported that protest, and they supported it financially, kicked in $5, $10, $50, $100, $200, whatever the amount. And our own CBC propagandistic media, government-funded media, put out misinformation claiming that Ottawa was suffering from an illegal occupation, as if protesting in Canada is illegal when it's guaranteed as a right in our charter. So they lied to us in that respect. And then they claimed, they just echoed government claims that the financing coming, I think they raised something like $10 million, that it was coming from far right American groups or individuals and overseas elements looking to interfere in Canada's, democracy. And that was a lie. And we've had to endure so many lies from our media. And now CBC has been engaging in propaganda for the Liberal Party of Canada by, giving them blanket coverage of their leadership race, talking to people all over, only expressing one point of view, barely paying lip service to any other point of view with respect to, the trade conflict and, what the incoming Prime Minister of Canada must do. Whoever the Liberals pick will be the incoming Prime Minister. So what do you think this individual should do given the situation? And everyone's echoing. It's just one narrative being played out. And it's propaganda. And it was designed, I'm convinced, this is an opinion, not stating fact, but it's a strongly held opinion, that the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation is there to tell Canadians that we need to we need to have Mark Carney leading this country into this critical time in our history when we're facing a trade war with the United States of America. Meanwhile, they say nothing about all the tariffs that are being imposed on Canada's agricultural products. I think canola oil is one. We're getting hit by the Chinese with 100% tariffs, and crickets on that front. No one is talking about that. Everything is centered toward, the tariffs that the Trump administration has imposed on pretty broad-based the Canadian economy. And those tariffs are now slated to come into effect April 2nd. We'll see if they do. Lots of things. There's so many different angles going on right now. And there's a CBC News article out that I read that came out just today talking about the level of stress and how Canadians are so worried and everything. And this is very much reminiscent of the COVID era when they wanted everyone scared and worried. So they shine a bright spotlight on the reaction they want to get. They want Canadians living in fear, because people who live in fear are easy to control. I'm here to tell you, don't live in fear. Let me go on with what's being said. As I say, and don't worry about little typos. I can always figure it out. Live in Canada. And thank you, Jeffrey. Glad you're in agreement. For what it's worth, for anyone else watching, if you're not in agreement, if you think Mark Carney is the greatest guy in the world or whatever, fair enough. I am a 100% thorough advocate for free speech, even though I may not agree with what you have to say or your opinions. I will not censor. I'll certainly argue, debate, take the counter view, but I don't believe in censoring. I'm not like the CBC. I'm not like CTV and Global. I'm not like the mainstream legacy media that wants to push people. First, drive fear, because what fear does is it gets a person to shut down the higher thought process that happens in our frontal lobes of our brain. What happens in a state of fear is the frontal lobes basically shut down, and we retreat back into what is referred to often as the mammalian or animalistic brain, where we're in reactionary mode, fight or flight. And people in that state of mind who have shut down their higher thought process are far easier to control and manipulate. And we saw that in spades during the COVID era. So many people they rolled up their sleeves, not because they had a thorough understanding, not because they've been given all the information on the product that was being injected into them, but because they were afraid for themselves, afraid for elderly relatives, whatever the case. They weren't informed. They didn't know. I mean, our own parliamentarians in Canada aren't allowed to see the contracts that the government of Canada signed with the Pfizer's, Moderna's, AstraZeneca's of the world. Not allowed to see those contracts unless you first sign a um, a non-disclosure agreement, so that you're never allowed to disclose what is in those contracts. And this is supposed to be, a sock boy. That's a name given to Prime Minister Trudeau because he likes to wear, fancy socks. Love to, he'd sit with his leg up and, love to show off his fancy socks. I always called him selfie boy because he loved going around getting selfies with everybody. Like I think he honestly regarded that as a function of the prime minister, to be out and about and taking selfies with people. And Eat Me, who's in Montreal, a regular contributor on the station, watches frequently, and I always appreciate that. I love everyone who comes on. When I was doing my earlier stream with my buddy Dave, a kid I grew up with in New Jersey, and just to put a fine point on that, because there are some new people watching probably tonight. I'm a Canadian, born in Canada in 1966, a Gen Xer, and 6 months old or thereabouts, my family, my dad moved us down to New York City. My dad worked in the financial industry. He worked for one of the big 5 Canadian banks with operations in New York. That's where they had international banking operations. They also had a retail branch. And actually, that's the first thing my dad did. He was managing the tellers in a retail branch in what the bank he worked for referred to as their New York agency. So that's what he would say. I'm going down to the agency. But he worked on the ground floor where they had a retail banking operation. And then later, he went up and was working on the bond trading desk. They brought him back. My dad didn't like living in New York. Very expensive. And we had to live in Staten Island, which is it's not the nicest place in the world, and certainly not 1966, 67 when we moved down there. And so then they transferred him back to Canada, and he wanted to stay in Canada because that's where all his friends and family. It's where my dad grew up. He grew up in Ottawa and Sudbury. And so a few months later, they came. They said, "We want you back in New York." They liked my dad. He was a sharp man, very, very astute. And so they wanted him back in New York. They wanted to get him upstairs in the bond trading desk, and eventually ended up managing it. But at first, he did not want to go. He did not want to go back to the U.S. Too damn expensive. So he gave them they said, "How much would it take?" And he gave them what he thought was too high a figure. And he was floored when they came back and said, "Okay, you got it." And he was like, "Damn, I should have asked for a few grand more," because he asked for just less than 20,000. And afterwards he said, "Damn, I should have asked for 20. If they're going to give me 17, they would have given me 20. And this is back in around 1970, when to make 10 grand a year was, ooh, I'm making 10 grand. And you could buy a house at that time for, $30-ish thousand. So if you're making 20 odd grand a year, put that into, today's, if you're making 20 grand and a house costs 30, well, what does a house cost now? If you're looking in Toronto, a house costs $1 million for a decent house, and at least $1 million. So, if you're making 500,000, it's double your salary. And who makes $500,000 a year? Certainly not I, not many people. I like what he writes, though. CBC, lie, baby, lie. And Eat Me is writing that Mark Carney is so great that all the angels played their trumpet in the sky, according to a CBC journalist. Just a little humor. Oh yeah, he is going to be get ready for the propaganda to come out. He's going CBC, CTV Global are all going to be all over him. And you have to realize most people are aware of this. Non-Canadians may not be, but it's in around $400 million a year, roughly in that area, is doled out to the legacy media in Canada. That's not including CBC. CBC on its own gets over $1 billion a year because it is a crown corporation. It is owned by the government of Canada. It's like the old TASS Soviet news agency. It's funded completely, it's owned by the government. And then there are private media outlets like CTV Global, like Bell Media Enterprises, they own CTV. Can West, I think they own Global. And then you have media, or you have newspaper outlets, National Post, Toronto Star Corporation, and collectively legacy mainstream media outlets that are not part of the CBC. They receive $400 million collectively, so they all get their slice of the government pie. And so if you expect the legacy media to build up the Conservative Party of Canada, which has spoken out against this these subsidies going out to mainstream media outlets, and has talked about defunding the CBC. You think the media machine in this country is going to be friendly to the Conservative Party of Canada? If you think that, you're probably on booster number 8. And no one's taking boosters anymore. And that was just reported recently that the level of uptake they're still recommending, especially for people who are elderly and health compromised, every 6 months. And apparently the number of people actually getting it has basically fallen off a cliff. No one's playing along anymore. What do we got? Oh, I'm caught up completely on the chat. Please fill it up, guys. I'm not going to go on too much longer, but I'll talk about what I think is going to happen. And again, this is not just this is a widely shared opinion. What is going to happen is probably within the next day or two, we'll have an announcement of the transition. Mark Carney will have to name a cabinet. They'll have to, well, first, what will have to happen is that Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney will go see the Governor General, and there will be a transition. And so within the next day or two, they'll be saying, we're going to go to the Governor General on Thursday or Friday or Tuesday next week. They'll pick a day when there is going to be a formal transfer and what will happen is Mark Carney will be sworn in as the Prime Minister of Canada. Once that happens, then Mark Carney has to name a cabinet. He could keep the cabinet that he has. He could maintain Justin Trudeau's cabinet. He could do that. That's my suspicion. I think that's the most likely outcome, is that Mark Carney is going to maintain the cabinet as it is, because after all, Parliament isn't even sitting right now. Trudeau suspended it. I think the date is March 24th when this prorogation, the suspension ends, March 24. So why bother? And then what I suspect is Mark Carney is going to go to the Governor General and ask to have Parliament formally dissolved, and for the purposes of having a general election. And then what Canadians will be looking at voting for our next Parliament in about four to 6 weeks' time. So we're right now March 10th. So sometime in April, early May, Canadians will be going to the polls to vote for the next election. I would bet money on this, that we will be going to the polls sometime late April, early May, that Mark Carney will never actually take a question in the House of Commons. And the reason behind that is because he's an unknown quantity right now. All Canadians know about him is that he used to be the governor of the Bank of Canada, and he was governor of the Bank of Canada during what is typically referred to as the Great Financial Crisis, the subprime lending crisis that took down a large segment of the U.S. housing market. And I could do a whole video on what happened there, this subprime lending. It was a a house of cards waiting to fall, what they did in the United States. And it obviously world's largest market economy. It impacted Canada, but we didn't get hit as bad. And of course, Mark Carney, rightly or wrongly, he gets a lot of the credit. I think Stephen Harper deserves a lot of the credit for that. Uh, anyway, let's see what's being written. I have me further writing, considering they all voted electronically, no paper ballots, no trail if they just cheated the system to install WEF Carney. For what it's worth, I do think Mark Carney won legitimately. Canadians were never going to vote for Chrystia Freeland, Canadians writ large, in a general election. Twitchy or bobblehead girl. She got a number of different nicknames. There was no way Canadians would ever vote for that. And liberals are not that stupid that they would have chosen her. They were going to choose Mark Carney right from the beginning. And if I'm going to, be a bit nonpartisan, I mean, I am a in the context of today, I am totally behind the Conservative Party of Canada. I want them to form the next government. But if I'm going to put on the hat of a liberal and pretend, and say what if I was working for the Liberal Party, if they were paying me to advise them and I was giving them honest advice, I'd say you have to pick Mark Carney. I think anyone with any brains intelligence realizes that he has the best chance at having the Liberal Party of Canada form the next government. So there's no, I mean, and the other two individuals running, heck, Karina Gould and Frank Baylis, I barely know their names. I just had to look them up. So they didn't have to install Mark Carney. Liberals are smart enough to realize that he has the best chance in a federal election that's going to be coming up. D. Ski is writing, Jean Chrétien lied about Iraq. Yeah, there's a lot of, Chrétien got credit for keeping Canada out of that, the invasion of Iraq, the second Gulf War. After 9/11, after Afghanistan, then they went in and invaded Iraq, and Canada stayed out of it. However, we did send support troops. It was a backhanded support. So Chrétien basically, and I don't mean any disrespect to the man because of his Bell's palsy affliction. Chrétien suffered from facial paralysis as a child after a case of pneumonia or something. So he talked like that. But he talks out of both sides of his mouth. Chrétien was an incredibly skilled politician. He knew how to play both sides, one off against another. And so to keep the Americans happy, he gave backhanded support to that war. But publicly, it was behind the scenes support. Publicly, he'd talk about how he kept us out of it. In fact, and then D-Ski goes on to say, in fact, some sources claim that Canada's military support exceeded that of most coalition members. That level of detail I don't know about, but regardless. John 5 is here and is saying, so the longer Carney waits, the more he can be forgotten or people will realize who he is. I don't think Carney's going to wait. He has the advantage now of being something of an unknown quantity, aside from what the propaganda will tell people. They'll say he guided Canada through the financial crisis, 2007-8, and then he went on to the Bank of England. He became the governor of the Bank of England. The story is they basically recruited him, and he became governor of the Bank of England and guided them, this is the propaganda, through the Brexit process when the British voted to leave the European Union. And he's given, high marks by our lying news media for those two roles he played. And then from there, after leaving the governorship of the Bank of England, he went to the UN, where he's been a big advisor on climate change. And then for the past 4 or 5 years, he's been a senior advisor to the Trudeau government, helping push Canada over the cliff with these crushing carbon taxes, raising the cost of living on everything, electricity, gas, groceries, everything going through the roof. And thank you, Mark Carney. He's been, behind the scenes. He hasn't been the public face of it. Trudeau has been the public face of it. And Canadians, the Liberals couldn't win a by-election even in ridings they'd held for 20, 30 years. They couldn't, they lost like 4 or 5 by-elections in a row. Trinity Bellwood, I think, was the name of one in downtown Toronto, a fortress of Liberal support. They lost on the island of Montreal, in Hermon Verdun, La Salle Hermon Verdun, I forget, the riding name is too long. But on the island of Montreal, where the Liberals always win. I used to say that, on the island of Montreal, especially West Island, the Liberals can run a fire hydrant and win the seat as long as it's a Liberal fire hydrant. And yet they lost. And they kept losing by-election after by-election after by-election. And then finally, when Chrystia Freeland, late in December, submitted her resignation as the finance minister and basically called out Trudeau's gimmicks. That was the straw that broke the camel's back for the majority of the Liberal caucus. And they more or less pushed Trudeau out the door. He did not want to go. But the guy who's been advising him for the last 4 or 5 years in these policies that made him so damn unpopular, now he's the new leader, Mark Carney. But Canadians don't pay. There are a large percentage of the voting public who don't pay that close attention. The political scene is background noise. And so, and Pierre Poilievre, as much as I like him, he has an incredibly sharp mind. He's very verbally skilled. He can get his point across very well, but he has all the warmth. He doesn't have a lot of warmth. I'm trying to think of some metaphor, but he has all the warm fuzziness of a bologna sandwich. He's very sharp and very to the point. And Canadians do appreciate, a lot of Canadians, well, I just don't like him. Yeah, he's smart and he's this and that, but I don't like him. He seems very coarse. And I want someone who makes me feel good. Well, what if they ruin the country? Yeah, but at least I'll feel good while the country is being ruined. That's why Trudeau still managed in the last 2 federal elections. The Liberals got about 32% of the vote. They actually got less votes than the Conservatives in the last 2 federal elections, but they were able to still win more seats because they won the close races in Ontario. That's basically what it boils down to. And John 5, yes. Well, yeah. What he did is Canada sent support for when the Americans were ousting Saddam Hussein, but the Canadian support for that war was back channel support, not front and center support. And Chrétien lied a lot, but he was a very popular and a very skilled politician. He knew how to play the game. During his tenure as Prime Minister, what happened was the Liberal Party of Canada, they gave large contracts, advertising contracts, non-tendered government contracts to do advertising for the government of Canada, and they gave the contracts to Liberal-friendly ad agencies. And then those Liberal-friendly ad agencies basically did nothing, and some of that money was funneled back to the Liberal Party in the form of political donations. And the Conservatives of the time under Stephen Harper were referring it to it as the $1 billion boondoggle, and they called it ad scam. And Jean Chrétien just stonewalled. There's nothing to see here, folks. Or rather, there's nothing to see here. This is just what the opposition does. They're trying to make a mountain out of a molehill is nothing. And he won 3 majority governments, and then he resigned. He was old. I think he was, getting in around 70 or 75. I forget how old he was when he left as Prime Minister of Canada. And so he was replaced by Paul Martin. And Paul Martin, under rather than stonewalling as Chrétien did, Paul Martin held an inquiry called the Gomery Inquiry, and it aired all the liberal dirty laundry, basically. And Paul Martin, it had happened under Chrétien's leadership, but Chrétien stonewalled and wouldn't have an inquiry and wouldn't investigate the allegations. But Martin did, and he basically hung himself. And after that Gomery inquiry happened, Prime Minister Paul Martin called an election and was defeated by the Stephen Harper Conservatives. Just a little political history. Eat Me wrote, if you watched QP question period, you would know why I nicknamed her Karina Gould as opposed to Karina Gould. I don't watch question period. I see highlights here and there, and I see little snippets on YouTube and such. People will highlight things and I'll watch that, but I'm never watching question period, just watching a bunch of moronic backbenchers pound their desks. And it's schoolyard. It's juvenile question period, sadly, but that's what our politics has degenerated to. And Eat Me believes Gould was a brainless, sold-out liberal on the fringe. Well, how many votes did she got? 3.2% of the points. I don't know how many votes she got. They give a breakdown by riding, but like in Avalon, which is, I think it's in Nova Scotia, in that riding, 8 votes to Frank Bayless, 252 for Mark Carney, 24 for Freeland, and Karina Gould, 4. Cape Spear, I know where that is. That's in Newfoundland. Frank Bayless got 5. Mark Carney got 418. Chrystia Freeland just 37, and Karina Gould only 5. So anyway, thank you for that. That's the writing. And Eat Me, this is when Eat Me started watching my podcast, when I gave the results of the Montreal by-election where the Liberals went down to defeat. I think they lost that seat to the Bloc Québécois. And La Salle Ville et Mar Verdun, which I mistakenly, during that podcast, I mistakenly identified. I thought that that riding would be characterized more as East Island, but I was wrong. I don't live in Montreal. I visited it a number of times, many times, but I don't know the geography that well. And when I see Verdun, I tended to think of Verdun as being East Island. But as it turns out, that riding is West Island, something of liberal fortress. And then Eat Me goes on to write, let I think she's trying to make a play on the word carnival, carnival, or not sure exactly what the play on words you're trying to make there. Let the carnival begin. And so we're entering the Mark Carney era, but we're not there yet. Trudeau's still leader of the Liberal Party. He's still the Prime Minister of Canada. At some point this coming week, I expect it'll be announced that there's going to be a formal transition. They'll go to the Governor General. Mark Carney will be sworn in. And then I expect that within mere days, a week or two at most, Carney himself, as Prime Minister, will go to the Governor General, and we'll be looking at an election call 4 to 6 weeks. So sometime late April, early May, Canadians will be going to the polls. And the reason they're going to do that, quickly, is because right now the Liberals have seen, I talked about this much earlier, people were jumping on me, not because they're mad at me, but they disagree with me, that, the Liberals are done, the Canadians will never vote for Liberals again, da, 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 da. And I had said at that time, and I continue to say it, is that under Mark Carney's leadership, I could see the Liberals gaining enough traction to either knock the Conservatives down to a minority situation, or conversely, maybe even possibly win a minority themselves. And then we go back to what we've been living for the past several years with the NDP propping up the Liberals. Jagmeet Singh, leader of the NDP, oh my, yeah. I'm not impressed with that man at all. But he's playing the political game as best he can, and he's a member of the third party, It's not even the third. They have less seats than the Bloc Québécois, and the Bloc Québécois only runs candidates in one province, Quebec. And the NDP can't even beat the Bloc Québécois running. I don't know how many seats there are in Quebec, probably 80, 90 seats in Quebec. And Jagmeet Singh and his party are running candidates in all 338, and he can't even beat the Bloc Québécois. But he has enough seats to prop up a Liberal minority government. And so he gets to keep his job. He gets to qualify for a gold-plated pension as a parliamentarian. And man, and Amy said, "Yeah, Carnival. Yeah, I was able to figure it out." Although you're bilingual, most people in Montreal, most people living in Quebec, a lot of people, Montreal especially, are bilingual, English, French. I have Dee on, and Dee is writing, Carnival Carney is just that tax obsessive, virtue signaling lizard who slithers in and out when he wants. Well, during the election when the Stephen Harper-led Conservatives were going up against the Michael Ignatieff-led Liberals. Michael Ignatieff became leader of the Liberal Party, but before doing that, he moved back to Canada from the United States. He'd been a professor at Harvard University, and he'd been living in the United States for the past 20 or so years. And the Conservatives were very effective in branding Ignatieff as just visiting. He's just visiting Canada. He's not really Canadian. Mark Carney, almost, I think, anticipating that, has put out ads of himself playing street hockey, and that kind of thing, trying to, and doing speaking engagements at hockey arenas, trying to associate himself with Canada's biggest sport, hockey. And I think genuinely, I think that was in anticipation that the Conservatives might try and label him as just visiting. Oh yeah, he went to England, then he moved down to New York, and now he's come back to Canada, and he wants to wrap himself in the maple leaf flag. Give me a break. Mark Carney took his company, Brookfield, the company for, I shouldn't say his company, but he was chairman of the board of directors. And in October, when he was still chairman of the board, the board of directors voted to move Brookfield Asset Management, a large property development company, to move their headquarters down to New York City. He likes New York. Does he like Canada? I wonder. Of course, he's going to, if he doesn't like Canada, he, as leader of the Liberal Party and wanting to, remain as prime minister, he's going to pretend to love Canada. And he lied during the Liberal leadership race and said that the decision to move Brookfield's head office to New York, that it was made in December after he had left his role as chairman of the board. Turned out he lied. That vote was made in October when he was still chairman of the board, and he endorsed it. Let's go to New York. New York, you got Central Park. It's beautiful. Some people like living in New York. A lot of people do. My dad actually, he didn't like how expensive it was, but there were things about New York he genuinely liked. It's there's New York is like a country unto itself, with all its different parts, Brooklyn, the Bronx, Queens. It's got that city has a lot of character, and there are things that you can like about it. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up the video because we're getting late. It's now after midnight, so we've led into the 10th of March. We've gone from the 9th to the 10th. Canada will soon have a new prime minister. Soon we'll have a new leader of the Liberal Party, and that is Mark Carney, and he will soon be the Prime Minister of Canada. I don't suspect it will be for very long because we're going to be going to the polls, and then it will be up to Canadians to decide whether they want Mark Carney as Prime Minister. Right now, it was card-carrying Liberal Party members who voted in Mark Carney as our Prime Minister. Only card-carrying members of the Liberal Party, and only those card-carrying Liberal Party members who were approved to take part in the voting process. And they picked Mark Carney to be the next Prime Minister of Canada. But within a month or two, it's going to be the choice of Canadians writ large. And we'll decide whether we want Mark Carney as our Prime Minister. And I'll be talking about it frequently. It'll be a frequent topic of conversation on my live streams. I haven't spoken yet. I haven't mentioned the fact that I think I did mention I'm the poster child for cancel culture, in that I'm a white, straight, an old white, straight Canadian male and a Christian. And I haven't talked about my Christian faith. And I recognize that a lot of people in the world, in Canada certainly, have a very negative view of Christians, of Bible believing evangelical Christians. And that is fair enough. I don't take issue with that. I understand it. I get it. And the reason I get it is because I walked away from the Christian faith when I was around 17, 18 years of age. And for most of my life, I did not confess Jesus Christ as Lord. Now I do. But at the same time, I come at things from a bit of a different perspective, because for so long I walked away and I rejected and I actually mocked the Christian faith. Not anymore. I started getting my feet back on the Christian path around the age of 40, and around 2006. I started to get more and more and more into my faith, and that continues daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. I am getting more and more into my Christian faith, and that is part of this station, part of my podcast. So if you're violently radically opposed to any Christian content, you're not going to want to subscribe. You're not going to want to hit the like button. You'll want to hit the thumbs down button. But the gospel good news of Jesus Christ is needed more than ever in this world. And I recognize that religion, there are a lot of negative aspects to religion. Churches are human, broken institutions, like our political institutions are broken and flawed, and churches are no different. But that's not, Jesus isn't the head of any particular religion. Jesus Christ is the savior of the world. I'll get into that more in other podcasts. I tend to do specific ones related to my Christian faith. But at the end of every podcast, I like to give a blessing, because we're living in difficult times. We have our largest trading neighbor bringing in protectionist measures to try and build up their own industries, their manufacturing sector, their steel industry. They want to build up their economy. And so they're placing these tariffs. And my own attitude is, hey, that's fair enough. If you want to, revive your steel industry, if you want to revive your manufacturing base, you want to improve your textile industry and everything else, hey, God bless you. That's your choice. It's your country. I do not think Canada should be retaliating, because all that is going to do is going to drive up the cost of living in Canada. When we place tariffs on American products, and we buy a lot of American products, well, if you put a tariff on it, now it's going to become more expensive for Canadians. And with carbon tax Carney, who's, Mr. Climate Change, should do a video just on climate change and why I do not believe the narrative of anthropogenic or human man-made caused climate change. Climate changes. Irrespective of what humans do, climate changes. But I'm going all over the place. I'll give the last word to Eat Me. Carney considers himself as a European, caught on video during a WEF event. I think he thinks of himself as a citizen of the world, like Trudeau. I'm a people. The only thing is, Carney is a lot smarter than Justin Trudeau. He's got Trudeau's IQ, my guess would probably be 105, 110, somewhere around there. I think Carney, 130, 140, in that ballpark. I don't think Carney's a genius, a super genius, 160 or higher. No, but he's Mensa category. He's 130, 140, somewhere in that range. He's a sharp cookie, And he's going to be a more formidable opponent for Pierre Poilievre than Justin Trudeau would have been. And that's the thing, they took the Conservatives a while. Stephen Harper was a highly intelligent, very effective politician. But after 10 years or so, you wear out. Trudeau, he was worn out after his first term. He lost the popular vote in 2019 and 2021. But now I'm rambling again. So let me give the blessing. The blessing is this. It comes from the book of Numbers. They're not my words. I'm going to read them directly as it's written in the Bible. This is a blessing that was spoken over God's covenant chosen people after they had been delivered from bondage in Egypt. And Moses was given this blessing to give to Aaron, and Aaron spoke it over God's covenant chosen people, the Israelites. Israel, incidentally, means he who struggles with God. So it's at the end of chapter 6, starting in verse 24. And the words are these: the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And even in these crazy, tumultuous times, war in Ukraine and Russia, war in the Middle East, a burgeoning trade dispute between Canada and the US, political upheaval in Canada, even in these times, you can find peace by getting into relationship with the creator of all things through his son, Jesus Christ, who went to the cross to die for you. For God so loved the world, John 3:16. Anyway, thank you for that. Eat me. One day I got to do a video just on church hurt. I get it. Churches are broken, fallen institutions. Anything human is never going to be perfect, but perfection is there. And we get little glimpses of it, but we'll get to see it when we cross the veil, when we reconcile ourselves to a perfect and holy God. Anyway, good night all, and we'll see you in a night or two. All right. And oh yeah, last thing. If you're not adversarial completely to the Christian message and you like what I have to say and you think I have something to contribute, you're most welcome to subscribe. I appreciate all of them. I've gotten about 10 more just in the last day or two. I'm getting up, hopefully I can get up to 1,200 soon. I'm 1,100 odd, 1,100 plus. Hopefully I can get that up to 1,200, and then who knows? Who knows what can happen? So, and the Healthy Truth is here saying good night and thank you. You're welcome, and thank you for showing up. Appreciate you coming on. Appreciate you putting up a comment. God bless all. We'll talk to you soon. Ending the stream.